I'm here to discuss one of the most fascinating subjects, and this is something which I have not ever even seen before, or anything like it. It is Michelle Obama's latest podcast with her brother, Craig. And it's, for lack of a better word, horrible, cringeworthy. It's been met with widespread criticism, shock, and alarm, as far as I'm concerned, largely due to its insufferable self importance, this performative victimhood on her part, and what many people are just calling the unsettling and awkward dynamic between the two. It's creepy. And this newest attempt at staying, I guess, relevant, disguised maybe as some, intimate sibling little tete-a-tete, instead reveals everything that the public has found so off-putting and weird and problematic with Michelle Obama over the years. And rather than offering some fresh insights, or dare I say, likability, this podcast serves as yet another platform for her to talk endlessly about herself, to rehash old grievances and paint herself as misunderstood, not somebody thankful to serve as the First Lady of the United States for 2 terms. No, it was, I gotta find myself, and it was so different. What are you talking about? It's just incredible. She views herself as this misunderstood icon, rather than someone who enjoyed, again, the unique privilege of being the First Lady of the United States. How many people would be honored? Honored, not Michelle. No, 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 no. The podcast's biggest failure, if you could even say that, is the way it attempts to pass off its conversations as authentic, when everybody and anybody who watches it knows it feels calculated and rehearsed and staged. And the interactions between Michelle and Craig come off as forced and artificial and rehearsed, with both seemingly trying a little too hard to make their childhood anecdotes, sound fun, or dare I say interesting, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the word is. But for some reason, people think that it's just easy to do a podcast, that everybody can just sit down and people will find it fascinating. Well, wrong. Wrong. And she has not been able to resist making herself the focal point of any discussion. And this podcast is just incredible. I don't know where this comes from. She has never been able to resist, let me say this again, making herself the main subject of concern, the focal point. This is it. And what's even interesting, which is very strange, every time she says, remember those books she put out? Oh, that book that nobody read? It's all about me, finding me. And I've never seen, can you imagine Bess Truman doing this, or Lady Bird Johnson? I don't think so. And despite having spent 8 years in the White House as the most publicly celebrated First Lady in recent history, she, for reasons nobody understands, she still continues to act as though she is some form of, I don't know, that she's beleaguered, that it was tough, it was hard, nobody understood. Is she still struggling against these forces that seek somehow to silence her? What are you talking about? Rather than expressing gratitude for the unparalleled opportunities that she has had, rather than this, she constantly frames everything in her life as an uphill battle against those who refused to accept her, who didn't understand her, and this relentless, unending, insufferable need for self-mythologizing and this kind of faux, kind of like self-psychoanalysis. It makes the podcast tedious, unrelatable, boring, and cringeworthy. And while many listeners might have been interested maybe in I don't know, some light-hearted stories of genuine reflections. Oh, no, no, no. Michelle absolutely guarantees and ensures that every anecdote somehow circles back to the broader theme of how she overcame adversity. What are you talking about? How she was underestimated, or she wasn't ready for her time, or that the world in America wasn't ready for her brilliance. It's weird. It's the same narrative that she's been pushing for years now, and by now one would think it has lost any impact, and you think she jumped to a new story. And then she deals with the specter of her failing marriage. One of the most glaringly obvious aspects of the podcast is how much it appears to be a distraction from what many people think are Michelle Obama's personal life. It's really weird. I mean, you would think one would be interested in that, particularly the growing rumors about her troubled marriage with Barack Obama and other rumors that I think we know what we're talking about. For months there was speculation has been mounting that the Obamas are either separated or heading for divorce, fueled by her noticeable absence from important events and Barack's increasingly public solo appearances. But rather than addressing the elephant in the room, let that pun go, let it go, Michelle instead spends her time on this podcast carefully curating this distraction, this weird, I don't know what it is, leaning heavily on childhood nostalgia, her brother's presence to shift the focus away from her personal struggles, who helped save her when she lived in this hellhole called the White House. Interestingly, the absence of any real mention of Barack Obama in this latest project is glaring. If this podcast were truly about family and the bonds that shape one's life and blah, 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 one would expect some reflections, I don't know, on her marriage or her life or her children. Maybe her marriage with the former president. No. Instead, she seems determined, focused to keep the focus away from anything but that. This only adds fuel to the speculation that things between them are not as picture perfect as they have been presented. And this is incredible. So the decision to leave the comments on, this is my favorite. Was this a miscalculation or intentional? Perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the podcast rollout is the fact that Michelle and her team made the unusual decision to leave the comment section on. Given how carefully the Obamas have curated their public image and managed their media presence over the years, and the rumors and jokes swirling about her, this move seems either deeply naive or strangely intentional. It's very weird because the response from listeners has been overwhelmingly negative. I mean, brutal, with many folks calling out the podcast for being boring and self-indulgent and completely unnecessary. Not to mention and I'm not going to repeat them, but the jokes. And critics have pointed out the lack of substance, the forced and contrived nature of the conversation, stilted, unnatural, forced, prepared, phony, fake. And the fact that there's absolutely no demand yet for another Michelle Obama project is even better. If her team thought this would be a universally praised endeavor, they were profoundly mistaken. On the other hand, there was a possibility that this was done on purpose, to generate buzz, to generate negativity, so she could deal with it. Given how calculating Michelle Obama's media presence has always been, it's hard to believe that she didn't anticipate the backlash, or that her team didn't. And in a media world and landscape where controversy fuels clicks, it's possible that this was a desperate attempt to stay relevant through negativity. I know, it's crazy. But to stir up conversation, even if it meant inviting criticism, after all, in the world of politics and entertainment, I guess they always say even bad press can be spun into a narrative of persecution and victimhood. But is that really what you want? Was that it? And then there's the public's growing indifference. One of the most telling aspects of the podcast reception is the sheer indifference it's generated. Now, while some critics have been, vocal about its, I'll say it, cringeworthy nature, the vast majority of the public simply doesn't care, and that's worse. This marks a significant shift from Michelle Obama's earlier years in the spotlight, when every project she touched was met with glowing media coverage and near universal adoration. Her attempt to keep herself at the center of public discourse is, it's faltering, to be kind, because people are tired of the same repetitive messaging. The act is worn thin, and audiences are no longer captivated by these endless retellings of her childhood that nobody cares about the struggles or her supposed difficulties in navigating the world as a public figure. And what this says about Michelle Obama's future is even more interesting. This failed podcast, this attempt, raises important and critical questions about Michelle's future and whether she truly has the staying power she seems to believe she does. Her attempts to present herself as a political force somehow independent of her husband, which is nuts, have been largely underwhelming. And while media outlets still push the idea that she could be a viable presidential candidate, the public's growing and palpable disinterest tells a different story. At this point, it seems clear that Michelle Obama has overplayed her hand, overextended her welcome. The endless self-promotion, the carefully controlled narratives, and the attempts on her part to remain somehow politically relevant without actually taking any risk or sides or any particular position or worldview made her even less compelling a figure. And the more she talks, the more obvious it becomes that she doesn't actually have anything to say. So here's the bottom line. This was a misstep in a career of calculated moves. The Michelle and Craig podcast is yet another boner mistake, gaffe, misstep in a career that's been built on careful image control and selective storytelling. Instead of engaging in, entertaining talk and something that's relevant, something that's mildly coherent and interesting, it's only highlighted the worst parts of her, the worst aspects of Michelle Obama's public persona, self-absorption. Again, this performative, this performance, this pretend, this orchestrated and choreographed victimhood, and a total lack of genuine connection with the American public. Whether this was a genuine attempt to kind of reinvent herself or some poorly executed distraction from her personal turmoil, who knows? The result is the same. It's a product and a project that nobody asked for, nobody needed, and nobody wants to hear. That's it. If Michelle Obama wants to maintain any sort of relevance in the future, she will desperately need to drastically change her approach. The era of empty platitudes and this kind of a Deepak Chopra, going to find your inner, whatever. It's almost like Gaimala to an extent, but a little bit more coherent, but not much. But this self-aggrandizing, these narratives are over. The public is no longer buying it. And this podcast of theirs proves that is, well, we'll just leave it at that. Watch how few care except to attack. And ask yourself the big question, why would you be so stupid as to put something like this out? Well, what do you think, dear friend? First of all, please like this video. That means a lot. Subscribe to the channel. It's very critical that we get your subscriptions if you like my particular take on this. And also hit the little bell so you're notified of live streams and new videos. So in any event, until we see each other next time, remember my request and entreaty of you to comment as you see fit.